All righty, we have one more week from the time I'm recording this. At least, maybe you're checking this out a day or two after, but one more week until the NBA's regular season is back. Preseason has been a very nice taste, but I'm excited for meaningful basketball and fantasy basketball. Believe it or not, I've been doing this podcast for almost 6 months now. I think it'll end up being about 6 months to the day since the first episode of this podcast, the NBA regular season will be back. So we've been doing this show for a little while now without having any fantasy basketball to actually talk about, which is kind of crazy when you think about it. Doing 6 months of a fantasy basketball show with no fantasy basketball going on. But obviously, with being a dynasty show, typically, not this week, but typically, there's always basketball to be talking about. This is the Young Man Squad Fantasy Basketball Podcast, which is part of the Old Man Squad Sports Network, part of the Believe Network, and presented to you by our partners at FanDuel. Today, we are going to have Matt Lawson back on. I know for basically every other episode this week, it's been live shows, live Q&As. That will continue. We've got a couple more of those this week planned, potentially a fourth. But today, we are going to be not live. We're just going to be recording with Matt and talking about his redraft rankings. Typically, like I said, it's a dynasty show. And when we have Matt Lawson at NBA Dynasty ADP joining us, we're probably going to be talking about dynasty. But today we are going to be using his redraft rankings and taking a look at those to help you win your league. If it's a redraft league you're playing, I still recommend Matt's rankings. But even if you're playing dynasty, we've talked about this a bunch. It's still important if you want to win your dynasty league to know who's going to be good this year. Matt's got it all broken down, so we're going to have him on. We're going to go through his rankings, talk about, players where he is higher or lower on than your typical Yahoo pre-rank or ADP, and see where you can find really nice value. We will be bringing Matt on momentarily to get into that. All right, and we now have Matt Lawson joining us, and we are going to be discussing his redraft rankings. We got them up on the screen if you're watching, but if you're listening, we will definitely be calling players out and talking about quite a few of them. But Matt, with 1 week left until the start of the regular season, fantasy basketball is actually going to be played. We're not just going to talk about theories or situational things that could happen, players we like, players we don't like. We're going to talk about actual regular season basketball. You can win or lose a fantasy matchup starting next week. It's really exciting. How are you feeling about that?
I'm pumped about it. I've been taking in as much preseason basketball as I can handle, which is a lot. And I'll tell you that I think as long as we can just kind of turn injury sliders off and not have any more people tear like their UCL in their thumb or any of these other injuries that we've had popped up, people, ankles, sciatica for LeBron James. Like, let's just stop that. Let's make sure that everybody can get their drafts in and actually know who's going to be available. Hopefully, your drafts haven't happened yet. I think that everybody should probably just try to draft this last weekend that we're about to be upon, because there are going to be more things that happen this weekend that are going to move things up and down boards a little bit. There were even some stuff in the preseason games yesterday that makes me want to make some moves. I'm probably going to do one final update to these rankings. I've got top 150s for categories and points leagues, our friends and points leagues. I know you don't usually get a lot of love. I've gone through and done a completely separate set of rankings and projections for points leagues that you'll find in what I put together on my Patreon. And there's two different tabs there to be able to go between them. And that should give you, I think, you're usually getting these top 150s that are targeted entirely toward head-to-head leagues, categories leagues. I think that you need to be able to have a completely different set to be able to do it right. That's what we've done here. And for categories leagues, you're getting like the full exposure to the way that I think about fantasy. So every single player, I've got kind of their projected category impact to be able to give you an idea. If you're doing a punt build, who are the players that are going to fit in best with it? And this is a nice way to kind of simplify category leagues. I know we usually talk in Z scores. That can be somewhat helpful, but I don't actually think it paints the full picture of players who win you matchups. And that's what you're looking for in a head-to-head league. Who are players who are going to win me categories? Because I need to get to 5 categories that I win to be able to win my matchup in a 9-category league. I need needle movers. I need guys who actually make a difference in categories, especially early on. If a guy just has a flat stat set where everything's average, it doesn't really make a difference in the category, that's fine to take in the later rounds as a base. It's great in roto leagues, but it doesn't help you in head-to-head. So a lot of my focus is on making sure that I'm putting together a group of players who are actually going to move the needle in categories. And that's what my rankings are geared toward.
And that type of analysis is why everyone needs to check out Matt's Patreon, subscribe to it, and get all of these rankings so they can use them to win their draft. If we're taking a look at these here, the top is pretty similar to what you see from either most rankings, from ADP data, within a spot or two. I think the first one here that I see that is a little bit of a difference is James Harden, who you have ranked at 8th, and using hashtag basketball's lovely ADP chart. He's going, his ADP in Yahoo Leagues is 15, ESPN is 15.4, Fantrax is 13. So there's a few players that are typically going ahead of him that you have ranked just below him in your category league rankings. What gives you confidence in a guy like James Harden? And I guess, how do you also feel about this restructured team? Do you think that adding in the players they did helps him out or hinders him at all?
Yeah, I mean, the great thing about Harden is that last year we saw him operate in basically two very different team structures, with Kawhi Leonard and without Kawhi Leonard. Without Kawhi Leonard, it was a little bit more of the Houston James Harden, where his usage was much higher. The assists were still really helpful, some of the near the top of the league. And then when Kawhi came back, the assists went through the roof. He was a little bit more efficient. The scoring wasn't as plentiful, but both of those versions were a first-round value in fantasy last season. I think that Harden, at his ADP right now, and even at his adjusted Yahoo pre-rank of at I think 12 now, he is still a value for me, and a guy that I'm willing to be able to take at the back end of the first round. I have him at number 8 in my categories rankings because that assist value is massive. Being able to have a guy who is going to be able to move the needle in assists, there are only so many of them that are available this year, especially in a season where we don't have Tyrese Halliburton. We don't have Jason Tatum, who was a huge assist producer last season. We don't have Damian Lillard. We don't have Kyrie Irving. We don't have DeJounte Murray. The list goes on and on of guys who are usually near, big assist producers, guys who are going to be able to get you a lot in that category. We don't have that this season. Yes, some of that is going to spread out to their teammates, but not in a way where you're going to be able to have it concentrated on most teams in one player that you're going to be able to have be a category winner in assists. Harden can do that. He can be a category winner in free throw percentage, where he lifts you up in that category as well. And the points, threes, and steals are always there for Harden. He really only hurts you in field goal percentage and turnovers, which is what you're going to expect from a lot of guards anyway. You can make that work and adjust to that, and it works for just about any kind of build. So I think even at 36 years old, for me, Harden this season is a really safe play, regardless of what's going on around him. We know what his role is going to be. I think he's going to have a really productive season again, and there's good reason to be able to, if you're in a dynasty league, view him as a win now piece that can propel you to a title this season.
Yeah, with all those injuries, we're not going to see Kevin Porter Jr. or Ryan Rollins averaging 8+ assists per game, or Andrew Nembhard, who's going to have a good year, isn't going to be replicating what Tyrese Halliburton has been doing. So getting those assists is definitely going to be really important. Another player that you are a good bit higher on here, and I think probably a little bit of a riser with the Fred VanVleet injuries, Amen Thompson, who you have ranked at 12th. And the ADP data is probably a little bit skewed because the injury happened after mock drafts or drafts that already started. But the Yahoo ADP for Amen Thompson is 23.1, ESPN 22.8, Fantrax 22.2. Most of the drafts that I've seen or been doing recently, he's been a mid-second round guy, but you have him as the last, or what would be in a 12-team league, the last pick of the first round. What gives you that extra confidence for Amen Thompson to be the first player off the board from the Rockets in your redraft leagues?
Yeah, so with Amen Thompson, the injury to Fred VanVleet is the big headline here. That takes what was going to be a stat set that was very similar to what we saw last season, where he's hyper productive in field goal percentage, solid in rebounds, big steals, solid blocks, and taking away in 3 points of free throw percentage. Now it's bumping up that assist category pretty dramatically, because we saw last season when Fred VanVleet wasn't on the court, Amen Thompson's assist rate nearly doubled. And I think that, yes, you might see Reed Shepherd starting. They're not going to be running the ball through Reed Shepherd as much as they're probably going to be running the ball through Amen Thompson. I think they're going to try to get out and transition a little bit more this season with Van Vliet out, since they tended to be able to slow it down a little bit more with Van Vliet and play at a faster pace when he was off of the court. That's going to boost Amen Thompson as well, who's going to be an absolute tear in transition, going to be able to get the ball out to his teammates in that, especially as opposed to half-court offense, where I still think he can be plenty helpful, and I still think he's going to have the ball in his hands as a primary initiator on a lot of their sets. But it's that transition play where you're going to get a lot of the fantasy goodness from Amen Thompson. So I love him as a 5-category producer. That's huge to be able to get a guy who's moving the needle in 5 categories as a positive. Yes, he's going to take something off the table with the 3-pointers. There aren't going to be that many of them. I'm fine with that with a player that I'm taking even at the back end of the first round, because that's a category that I can easily make up with later round players and waiver wire players. 3-pointers are one of those categories where it's pretty easy to be able to find and supplement that if that's how your build works. Free throw percentage is going to hurt to some extent, but in a head-to-head format, this is a big thing for me. If you look through players' game logs, you're going to have weeks where the free throw percentage isn't going to help you. And then you're going to have weeks where it's really detrimental. That's going to be matchup to matchup. It doesn't necessarily mean that you need to punt, but you can't think of it as, especially in a head-to-head format, you cannot think of it as, oh, well, this guy's always going to hurt me every week in this category. That's not the way the percentages work. Ultimately, a guy doesn't shoot exactly, 68% from the free throw line for an entire season. There might be some weeks where they're shooting 50%. There might be some weeks where it's 75 to 80%. And you're going to have that strong variance that in that category where maybe you're just not worried about it from week to week, but you still might win it even with players who are going to hurt it like Amen Thompson.
Yeah, and I guess that's kind of the thing with punting, is that you're not trying to lose these categories, and the fact that just what if they just kind of get hot and just like have like a really nice night from the free throw line? Like, it's always a big headline when Giannis has his random 16 for 18 night from the free throw line, and it's glorious, and then it doesn't stick, but for that week or so, it could probably help you win your matchup. Expecting big things from Amen Thompson this year. 2 bigs that are pretty much consensus first round picks. Anthony Davis and Karl Anthony Towns. You have both as second round guys, early second round. So it's not like you hate them, but they're just like a few spots below where they're typically going, with Edey going in that pick 8, 9, 10 range, and Karl Anthony Towns in that 10, 11, 12 range, typically, depending on what platform you're playing on, but that's where their ADP lands. What has you just, I guess, a touch lower on those 2 bigs?
Well, if I had told you a few months ago that, before the Luka Doncic trade, that there was going to be a superstar coming into the Mavericks training camp, grossly overweight, photos of him looking like he was ballooning out of his jersey, you probably wouldn't have said that would be Anthony Davis. Number one, you wouldn't think Anthony Davis would even be on the Mavericks. But look what Nico Harrison has brought in. He's traded Luka Doncic because he can't stay in shape for Anthony Davis, who comes into training camp out of shape. And I'm going to tell you right now, it's not just that, because he'll probably lose weight as the season goes on. That was his excuse, like, oh, I'll play myself into shape. Like, that's really a great idea for a big man who's had a history of injuries to come in carrying extra weight and going into the season and figuring, oh, I'll just lose it as it goes on. But on top of that, we're already seeing Davis play at power forward for almost all of his minutes across the preseason. He is going to be playing and taking shots further away from the rim, which we know is going to ding his field goal percentage. And it's just about availability. I think Anthony Davis is going to have a great season when he's on the court. I do not trust him to be available. I don't trust him to be able to, play a full season. We've really only gotten it once a couple years ago from Davis in his final full season with the Lakers. And last season, it went right back to how it always is, where he's going to get nicked up. He's going to be out for an extended period. When he does get injuries, you're going to have plenty of games where all of a sudden he's, back in the locker room for portions of the game. I just can't do it. And I'm not interested in investing a first round pick to be able to do it. I have him just outside of my first round at number 13. He's a fade for me. And maybe I'll be wrong. Maybe it'll be like 2 years ago where he does stay available, but coming in out of shape was kind of the last straw for me, where I just said, I'm not going to invest that pick in Anthony Davis, even in a watered down first round where we're missing, Jason Tatum, Tyrese Halliburton this season. I just can't do it. When it comes to Karl Anthony Towns, this is an effect for most of the New York Knicks. For me, I think other than OG Anunoby, I'm kind of fading all of the Knicks this season just because I think there's going to be a lowering of their minutes ceiling, obviously with Tom Thibodeau leaving, Mike Brown coming in. And I think there's also going to be some shift in the offense, going to try to make it a little bit more democratic, a little less Jalen Brunson focus, which might help Karl Anthony Towns. But I think a lot of the focus of the Mike Brown system is going to be kind of that drive and kick, where they're going to be looking to be able to get downhill, spray the ball out to shooters. So if he's just ultimately going to be taking more threes, that's great for Towns in the long run on the court. But for fantasy, I don't think that's exactly what you want from him. That's going to be a little bit more like the offensive role that we saw from him in Minnesota, playing next to Rudy Gobert, where the fantasy stat set was very different than what we got last year in New York, where he was the primary center. We want Karl Anthony Towns to play center for fantasy. When he doesn't, it's still good. It's just not what we got last season. Mitchell Robinson is likely to start. We've seen that across the preseason, and it just doesn't look like we're going to get Karl Anthony Towns the way that we did this season or in the pre-Gobert Minnesota years.
Yeah, that was going to be one of my questions, was about Mitch Robinson, which you answered, but about how that would factor in there, because I know Josh Hart's kind of been a fade for most people as well, with Mitchell Robinson starting and Josh Hart coming off the bench and obviously not playing 37, 38 minutes per game under Mike Brown. All right, the next player that we can talk about that I wanted to talk about is a guy that you're significantly higher on. It's Cooper Flagg, who, just to go ahead and point this out here, our partners at FanDuel have as obviously the favorite for Rookie of the Year. You can also bet on a lot of his stats throughout the regular season. They have some specials for it. You can bet on him to record a triple-double. You can bet on him to score 40, 45, or 50 points. You can bet on him to score 30 points in his first NBA game. So you can check out all those lines for Cooper Flagg at our partners at FanDuel. But he's a guy you have ranked as a late second rounder, 24th in your rankings. If we're checking out ADP data, he is 43.1 in Yahoo leagues, 32.3 in ESPN, and 39 on Fantrax, which is pretty much a third or fourth round value there. Last night, he got the start at point guard. No D'Angelo Russell in that game. Only had one assist, but still they were experimenting with him starting at point guard, which is pretty cool. And I know that's something we kind of talked about from the moment that he got drafted with Kyrie. We knew Kyrie Irving was going to be out, and you were like, well, yeah, he could play point guard. He's a really good ball handler. And it's like, yeah, like that's really fun upside. Is that at all a factor as to why you have him ranked so much higher?
Yeah, we've been talking about this throughout the offseason. Ever since Flagg, it was clear that he was going to get drafted by Dallas, that he's going to have every opportunity to be the primary on-ball initiator and creator for this Dallas Mavericks team. D'Angelo Russell has limited ability to be able to drive the basketball at this point. His athleticism, which was already coming into the league at a kind of a lower level for a starting point guard, has been diminished pretty significantly by injuries over time. D'Angelo is going to get up plenty of threes. He's going to have the ball in his hands to some degree, but a lot of the offense is going to have to run through Cooper Flagg, and we've already seen that through the preseason. You don't need to project him to be into his prime years to be able to already have him this high in your rankings. And I have him at number 24 in my rankings, which I understand is a very, very significant leap above where he's going in any fantasy platform right now. I'm actually a little bit surprised, and I talked with Dan Besperis about this a couple of weeks ago, that there is not more hype around Cooper Flagg. We've had it in the dynasty space, but it seems like there's more of a muted response than I expected in the redraft space, especially considering the opportunity that he has. I don't think people fully realize the kind of fantasy player that Cooper Flagg is going to be. And my projection, I think, is fairly modest. I'm really only projecting him to be a significant producer, like an above average producer in assists, steals, and blocks here. I think he will probably be a negative in field goal percentage this season just because the volume is going to have to be so significant and the shot creation is going to have to fall on him to a more extreme degree than it will going forward in his career. But I don't think he's going to hurt you in points, threes, rebounds, or free throw percentage. And that creates a really nice stat set across the board that's going to be, I think, up to maybe a late second round level this season. And it just doesn't make sense to me that people are still taking him, going into the fourth round. Maybe he's even slipping into fifth rounds on some platforms. That completely undersells all of the upside that you could have. And I think that even kind of the more muted projections for him this season would at least have him being kind of a late third round pick. So this is the steal of the early rounds for me. I don't think you should leave your draft without Cooper Flagg. If you can get him in the fourth round, that's a smash value. I think he's just completely being misvalued by the market right now. And there's a misunderstanding of what kind of fantasy player he is. This is a guy who is going to consistently be in the top 10, top 5 of fantasy production across his prime. And yeah, this rookie season is just going to be a sample of that, but that sample is going to give you tremendous value.
Yeah, I think everyone just typically shies away from rookies, and that's probably why he is going as late as he is, because we know what's going to happen in 2-3 years, just how good he's going to be. That's why we have him as a top, I think pretty much consensus top 6, but at least top 10 dynasty player. Everyone has that. But we'll see. Maybe he's able to have this monster rookie season. I think he's basically locked in for rookie of the year. At least it feels like it's going to take a monster season from someone else, and probably injuries to him for that to not happen. Moving down the board, there's some nice values here, but one player I specifically wanted to talk about was Ausar Thompson, who you have ranked at 42. I forgot which mock draft I was doing, but I took him at 55 in a mock draft, and there was a lot of comments like, that's the earliest I've seen, or like, that's so early for Ausar Thompson. But you're a whole round ahead. So what has you this excited about what Ausar Thompson can do this season?
Yeah, I think that this is a player who has the right combination of fantasy stat set and opportunity this season. I think Ausar is going to play 30 minutes a night. I think that the Pistons were ramping him up toward that role last season when he had to kind of play his way into shape after not being allowed to participate in a lot of team activities because of the blood clotting issue that has now been resolved. Ausar Thompson is going to have a big role on this Pistons team. The only thing that could potentially limit him is fouling. And we saw him have a per 100 foul rate that was similar to Jalen Duren or Isaiah Stewart. So it's not outlandish. We're talking about, about 4 fouls per game at that kind of like full game load. I don't think that he's going to be limited. I think that we're ultimately going to get a huge amount of games played and minutes played from Ausar this season. And we're still kind of baking in what happened last year to suppress his value because I think people look at the minutes last season, they look at the overall availability last season, and they forget that was in context the result of the blood clotting issue, which is no longer a problem. Everything around Pistons camp has been hyping Ausar Thompson. We've seen in the preseason they've been putting the ball in his hands in non-Cade minutes and asking him to be able to create. This is exactly what we want to be able to see. And if you missed out on the Amen Thompson breakout last season, this is your moment to be able to get in on his identical twin brother, who I know he's not Amen Thompson. I still think Amen Thompson is a better basketball player. But if you could get 90% of Amen Thompson, you'd want that in fantasy, and you'd want that at the value that you're getting it at right now. Even as Yahoo continues to be able to push him up a little bit up the board with each update in their pre-ranks, we're still seeing rounds of value, I think, in that you're going to be able to get him with. So the hype has not gone far enough for me, even though Ausar, I think, is one of the most touted players by fantasy analysts this redraft season. He's a breakout that most people are predicting. I don't think they're predicting it at the correct level, so there's still value to be able to squeeze out of this. Having him at number 42 might seem aggressive. I don't think it's going to by the end of the season because you're going to get the kind of level of steals that is going to be matchup winning for you. I think the block numbers are going to be really strong. I think it's going to help you in field goal percentage, and I think the rebound and assists are at least going to be neutral average value for you. So there's really a lot to like in the stat set, a lot to like about the opportunity. I think Ausar is a clear breakout, and I don't think the market is fully appreciating how high that breakout could go.
Yeah, and the ADP data reflects that. Yahoo Leagues 81.5, Fantrax 81.2, ESPN 104.8. And I know that, maybe it's a little bit different for points leagues and ESPN, right? ADP just tends to be a little bit different from the other two platforms. But yeah, just 3-4 rounds of value there. So next, I got one more to talk about for category leagues, and then we can talk about points leagues for a few minutes. It's a big man that I'm also very much a fan of this season that you are a good bit higher on, and that is Donovan Clingan, whose ADP in Yahoo Leagues 85.9, Fantrax 90.3, and ESPN 124.8. You have Clingan at 63, so that's a good bit ahead of the Yahoo pre-rank, and then just rounds ahead of ADP on every platform.
Yeah, with Donovan Clingan, I'm looking at a season for him where he should be playing minutes in the upper 20s, came into better shape this year in Blazers training camp. And I think that there's every opportunity for him to be a guy who produces solid field goal percentage, elite rebounds, elite blocks. And it's kind of that traditional big man stat set in that way. For me, Clingan has every opportunity, if he can stay on the court, to be able to get above that upper 20-minute threshold. I'm only projecting him for 27 minutes. If it goes up any higher than that, then you could actually get even more of a smash value here. So this is a conservative projection where I still think that he's a top 70 player that you're able to get near the back end of the top 100. That to me makes a lot of sense, where you see people kind of reaching for centers in this range. If you didn't get them early on in a lot of drafts that I've seen, the mock drafts that I've done, the real drafts, you're seeing a lot of the centers start to go off the board in this area, as everyone's kind of afraid that they're not, going to miss out on the last guy who's kind of a solid, dependable center option. So you're going to get the Rudy Goberts of the world going off here, the DeAndre Aytons, Jared Allen. They're all going to start flying off in this range. And I like the security of knowing that I can likely get Donovan Clingan a round or two later. I think that there's been some concern. Oh, okay. Well, what about Yang Hansen? Like, is he going to be taking over too much of the load? I will tell you right now, I think we saw Yang against the Warriors, against a competent defense and a competent offense, and neither side of the ball looked that great. It was a little bit of a struggle for him. And then we got him against the Kings, who might have the worst front court in the league defensively, at least one of them. And he all of a sudden looked like a superstar offensively. And that's great. And I think that's a real reason for optimism in Yang in the future. But I don't feel great about him this season playing a big minute load. I think they are going to play Clingan and Yang together, or not together, but they're going to make the center rotation between those two. I think Robert Williams still not available. I would not expect Robert Williams to play a significant number of games this season, because he never does. But I think you're going to get a two-man, big man rotation between Clingan and Yang. I think Clingan's going to get the majority of those minutes. And if he's playing 27 minutes a night, that leaves plenty for Yang Hansen to be able to play. So I'm not concerned about that. If it's just the two of them, and even when Robert Williams comes back, I think he cuts into Yang a little bit, not Clingan. The on-off numbers last year told the story. The Blazers were a much, much better team when Donovan Clingan was on the court, especially in the second half of the season, than any other center that they had on their team. I think that he's going to have a really productive season this year. I think he's going to be a big part of what the Blazers want to do on the court. So he's one of the big values at center. If you miss out on some of the early centers in your draft, this is a good value to be able to get later in the top 100.
Yeah, and that's why they were able to make a push for the postseason. I know it didn't end up working out, but that's probably going to be the goal this year, assuming health for everyone. This is a team with a lot of young guys that are going to take a step forward, and then adding in a player like Drew Holiday, just a nice veteran defensive piece that has won at a high level. And then it doesn't hurt to have three competent centers, even if Robert Williams' availability is probably going to be limited. Say they're all healthy and you play Clingan 26, 27 minutes where he knows that there's two other competent centers. He can be more aggressive to get blocks and rebounds. And then you have Robert Williams for 10, 11, 12 minutes, Young Hansen for the rest of them. Like, that's not a bad thing. So I think, yeah, all three can be productive, though maybe not for fantasy teams, just because there isn't quite enough minutes to go around for all of them to be good for that. But looking at some of the points league rankings here, what kind of goes into your points leagues? Are you like, is this for a specific platform, or does it end up working out regardless of what platform you're playing or what scoring?
Yeah, so the majority of the points league players, at least who are in the dynasty space, and I think it's probably the largest portion of the pie platform-wise for points leagues, is Sleeper. So what I'm using here is Sleeper's default scoring system, which I find that most of the people who ask me questions about dynasty or subscribe to my content are using that scoring system. It doesn't change dramatically from other formats. Most points formats are fairly similar. This one suppresses points scored a little bit relative to others, where you only get a half point per point scored. But there are bonuses for 3-pointers. There obviously you get substantial value from rebounds and assists, as well as steals and blocks. And the other consideration here with sleeper leagues is that you're drafting players for a lock-in mode. So every week you're going to be able to pick a game to be able to lock in that score from a player once they've played the game, to be able to say that's the point value that I want to get from this player this week in my starting lineup. And you don't get the points from any other week that matchup that week. So you're going to be looking for players who can give you that big pop, who can have those big games. Being slow and steady, while that might be helpful in a head-to-head matchup where you get 4 games a week, it doesn't do as much for you in this format. So you want players who can really leap off the page in certain statistical categories that cause them to have big spike games that you can lock in throughout your week. So that's a consideration that I'm making as I'm making my rankings here. But overall, I think these are usable for any platform. I've also included in my rankings here my ranking versus the sleeper pre-rank, and there is massive value here. I did not find sleepers pre-ranks to be that thoughtful. They seem to be random in some places, and I think they're missing out on a lot of the value of some of these players. You also find that I did fantasy points per game projections, totals projections based on the games played and minutes that I projected for all these different players. So you'll really be able to get an idea of, what does this player look like from a per game perspective? If you think that I'm wrong about their games played, you could take a look at that and say, well, I think this guy's actually going to play 73 games. So if he is getting this many fantasy points per game, that would move him up to this level. So you could play with this if you get these rankings to be able to move guys around a little bit. But that's the big consideration for me, on top of that it's harder to find guards who can score at an elite level in this format and in points formats in general, because often guards are not going to give you anything in the rebound category, which is the predominant category where players get value in points leagues, because rebounds are plentiful. There's a lot of them in every single game, and most formats give you at least a point, if not up to 1.2, 1.25 points per rebound. That's pretty common across fantasy platforms. So you get a lot of value from guys who get double-digit rebounds. That base, that foundation, it's also very steady, where you're going to get similar rebound production from game to game compared to other categories that are less dependable and less consistent from game to game. So those players are difficult to find. So if you can find guys with guard eligibility, like a Luka Doncic, who gets a ton of rebounds, like LaMelo Ball, who's pretty good in the rebounding category, on top of adding on all the value that they get in assists, on top of the scoring, that points, rebounds, assist value in a guard is extremely valuable. So I push up a lot of guards in my points rankings, because I find it becomes difficult to be able to find players who are as helpful as big men, who are even more valuable in points formats. So you can get someone like Ivica Zubac last season pushing up into like the top 30 of fantasy production because of his elite rebounding. That's easier to be able to find late in your draft. You can get big men to be able to fill in those slots. I would not take the bait in taking them unless they're a big assist producer too, or a big time scorer on top of it, and they really separate themselves from other centers. I don't think that's valuable. So that's a lot of the theory that drives these points rankings.
Yeah, and just looking through your top 25 or so players, the players that you're significantly higher on, that doesn't surprise me at all exactly who it is, being Cooper Flagg, Jalen Johnson, Amen Thompson, Evan Mobley, Alperen Sengun, Josh Giddey, just a lot of players that I could just picture as like Matt Lawson's guys that he really likes or is higher on than everyone else. So it doesn't surprise me that there is a ton of value there for the guys that you mentioned. Is there any other, because I know this is probably what literally everyone that listens to podcasts cares about, any like late round sleepers or league winners that you think that you could get in, maybe not the later rounds, but later on in your draft, that could help you just really win your points league?
So I talked about this a couple weeks ago with Dan Besbris on our My Guys episode that we did. But Zach Edey to me is a screaming value in both categories and points formats right now, in both Sleeper and Yahoo. You can get him outside of the top 100. And it's because of the injury. I think Edey would be like one of the big hype guys of this season, of this redraft, drafting season, if he was coming into the season healthy. But he's already participating in basketball activities. The timeline that the Grizzlies gave out at the start of training camp and media day was that he was going to be at that time out 6 to 9 weeks. That projected out going forward means that he's either going to be back in early November or late November. But back in November. And to me, that creates a huge buying opportunity because I think Edey can be a top 80, top 70, maybe even top 60 performer for you across the entire season. If he gets what we saw at the end of last season, which was with his current coach, it was in the interim period with Thomas Isalo at the end of the season. They started to play Edey significant minutes. They started to play an offensive scheme that relied on Edey's gigantic screens that he can set more often. And he immediately started jumping up into double-doubles, into minutes in the high 20s. That continued in the playoffs against the Oklahoma City Thunder, dispelling all of the concern about Edey not being played off of the floor. Even the Oklahoma City Thunder didn't play him off the floor. And Memphis did have some competitive games in that series. Even after they lost Ja Morant, they still maintained to be competitive with Edey on the floor. I think that Edey is going to have a really big role. We're already seeing that Brandon Clark isn't coming into the season healthy. They're going to have to start Jock Landale at the beginning of the season. Everything is lining up for Zach Edey to return in November, be the starting center, play big minutes, and we know what the fantasy production is going to look like. For points leagues, you're able to get him outside of the top 100 right now. I would gladly take him, especially if I'm a little light at center, be able to get him before that ADP, get him around before, and I think you have a good chance to be able to win your draft from doing that.
And then you can stick him in your IL or IR spot, I guess, kind of depending on what platform you're looking at, for a couple weeks, pick up someone else to stream in, and it works out pretty nicely to start it off until he is healthy. But we'll go ahead and wrap up this episode. Matt, thank you, as always, for joining me and spreading your knowledge on this episode. Before we part, what content do you have coming up with the regular season approaching quicker than ever? And where can we find your work?
All right. So all my work you can find at patreon.com/NBA Dynasty ADP. If you've never come by before, stop on over. You can get a 7-day free trial and get everything that I do. That includes the top 150 for categories in points rankings for redraft that we just talked about, my dynasty rankings, my rookie rankings for dynasty leagues, my trade calculators, all of it available at patreon.com/NBA Dynasty ADP. I do the free trial because I think you'll ultimately find value in it and want to stick around, because I'm going to continue to be able to put out monthly updates to my dynasty rankings throughout the season. And we're going to continue to be able to put out these shows throughout the season to be able to help guide you in your dynasty leagues, and to be able to talk some redraft and then the ongoing season as well. So Noah, I appreciate it, and looking forward to getting into the season with you next week. We are finally here. We have made it.
Absolutely. It's going to be a ton of fun all season long, but that's going to do it for this episode of the Young Man Squad Fantasy Basketball Podcast, which is part of the Old Man Squad Sports Network, part of the Believe Network, and presented by our partners at FanDuel. Once again, Matt, thank you so much for joining me for this, and we will see you guys next time.